All right, I'm going to show you a couple examples of how to represent this 3D model. So you have a framing model that you've been working on. What we want to do is render it. I'll show you some rendering techniques using Vray. I'm also going to show you how to export the line work and to create kind of an axonometric view of the projects. We can play with some of the styles down here in SketchUp. They have some preset styles and you can customize them as well. So these are various styles for the view of the project. This is the default here, but if we want kind of a whiteboard, there's a construction style. So this has kind of heavier line weights. Hidden line, which is nice for kind of drawing views. So we're going to use this hidden line view for the axon that we're going to create. So let's say we just want to do an axonometric view. So normally our camera is set to perspective, right? So there's multiple vanishing points in perspective. When I change my camera view to parallel projection, it makes all the lines parallel. So verticals are true vertical, and it's a isometric view. So I can take this and I can go to File, Export. So once I have a view that I like, and I'm happy with this, I can actually, let's create a view. So I want to save this view so that if I toggle around later on, I can come back to it. So I'm going to choose the view that I like, go to View, Animation, Add Scene. So that's going to add this scene so that if I'm doing something else, I can always click on this and it'll take me back to that view. So this could be useful if you want to create line work that matches your rendering, and you can overlay the two and it'll be the exact same scene. Okay, so I've gone back to the scene, I've saved it under View, Animation, Add Scene, and now I can go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. So this will give me a line, basically a PDF file of the actual line work. So save this to my desktop. Under options, I can change the size of this export. So this is going to be a pretty large file. I'm okay with that. And then hit export. So it just exported this as a PDF. And when you open it in Acrobat, you'll see that this hidden line view shows up, and all of the line work is also retained so that I can, if you zoom in, notice it's not pixelating. So this is all vector. So I could open this in Illustrator, and if I wanted to modify it, I could. So I'll show you how to bring this line work into Illustrator. So if you wanted a more cartoon-like drawing, you could use this method. So I've now opened it in Illustrator, and all of this line work is editable. So if I wanted to change line weights, I could easily do that. So if I wanted to change the line weights of these perimeter lines, I can go to Stroke and set the line weight to be a lot heavier. This is a really large drawing, so these line weights aren't really what they normally would be, but this is how to change the line weights. If you wanted to do some live paint, if you wanted to fill a portion of it, so I could select this, go to Object, Live Paint, Make, and now I can paint it. And so the live paint tool is actually under the shape builder. So if you hold down the shape builder tool, go to live paint bucket, and you can then set this to a color, and you can go in and shade your drawing. And so that can give you kind of a cartoon look for diagrams and for drawings. But make sure that you've changed your line weights before you go in and do your live paint, because then it's kind of tough to change after that. All right, so this is kind of heavy as far as line weights go, so I'm going to select these and bring the line weight down to maybe 1. And again, this is a really large drawing, so the scales are not really corresponding. As I scale my artwork down, I select all this and scale it. There's different settings in Illustrator. You can set it so that it will scale the line weights along with the drawing, and my setting is not set that way. So it's set to retain the original line weights when it's being scaled. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So you can have a really nice kind of diagrammatic view of the project this way. And from Illustrator, I would just go to File, Export, Export As, and save this as a JPEG. If I want it to crop based on my white space, I would check the Use Artboards button here and hit Export. All right, so that would be if I just want kind of a diagrammatic view of the drawing. And going back to SketchUp, if we turn on clipping plane, we can crop the view. I actually have it here. So this is a section plane. So I can use this to trim a part of the building. So I can move this. I hit M on my keyboard, and I can move this and cut a section through the project. I want to find a useful section here. So what's nice about this is that it's kind of shading every bit of material that I'm cutting through is solid black, and it's giving me a view that I can see into the house. And in this house in particular, we have bedrooms that have a ceiling over them, and we have a vaulted living space. So you can see this nice double height living room they have. They have a kitchen back here that does have a ceiling, but they're going to have all this attic space that they can use for storage. And eventually they, we have an opening here that they can use to access the attic, but they're thinking in the second phase of this, they can build a stair here and actually occupy that. We wanted a skylight in the roof, so we put it here. This is south facing, so all of our solar panels are on this south wall, so we didn't really want to kind of interrupt the solar panels and just cut out a skylight here. So we actually put it on the north side, and we framed that chase so that light can come in through here. So this is the framing, and then if I wanted to do the same thing, I could go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and export this. Export the section model as well. So I can go into Illustrator, File, Open, and now you'll see that model comes in as well. So this is a great view for showing, the relationship between interior and exterior. It's showing us the section view of the project. All right, so that's another strategy for this. Okay, and then going back into SketchUp. So let's say we want to, those are great for diagrams. Let's say we want to do a rendering of this. So I can delete this or hide this section view. Let's say I have a view that I like. Let's go back to this scene 5. I'll click on that. So it takes me back to that exact viewpoint. This is the Vray Toolbar. There's Vray Asset Editor. These are the kind of settings that you can play with in Vray. The teapot is kind of the universal symbol for render. So you'll see this in many different rendering software packages, but when you're ready to hit render, this is what you're going to press, and it'll calculate all of the lighting and materials that you've set in the project. This is the asset editor. So this allows us to change any properties and settings. If you're just getting started and you want to do a quick rendering, I would just go to settings under render output. This is all tab based, so you can expand each tab. It can be overwhelming. There are a lot of options that Vray has, but it is one of the more powerful rendering engines. It's probably the most accurate, and they're making a lot of advancements with it. You can actually change what type of rendering, what part of the computer you want to use to create your rendering. This is going to use your graphics card to render. This is going to use your CPU to render. And then this is also your GPU, so your graphics card. So I'm leaving this just to have my CPU render it. If I had a really powerful graphics card, I would use this. But I'm going to set this, you can set the image size. So I think it's going to default to like 900 by 800 or something. But I'm going to set this to HD, which is 1920 by 1080. So it's also referred to as 1080p. So that's the size that I'm going to render this. It's typical HD size. I can go up to, as high as I want here. You can make a billboard if you want. So I'm going to set this to that quality. I can adjust the quality. Medium is fine for what we're doing. If you set this to save image, you can actually tell it to automatically save when it's done rendering. So that's a nice feature to have. That way, if my computer crashes for some reason, I'm not going to have a missing file. Okay, so I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Okay, so when it's done rendering, it'll save it as a JPEG. Another thing to check is the lighting. In SketchUp, the default is sunlight, so it'll have a kind of sun that you can edit. If I want to expand this using this arrow here, I can change the sun orientation, but this is just giving you a preview of the environment that it's going to render at. So it's going to have this kind of blue sky, brown ground plane, and it's going to render that way. There is a sun source here. And if I wanted to change the orientation of the sun, I could check this on, and I could play with the altitude and azimuth, so the horizontal and the vertical angle. All right, so I could see how that affects the project here. And again, by default, this is unchecked, and it's just going to give you a shadow based on the camera location. Whereas here, we can be a lot more precise with where that is. We want to typically have the shadows be somewhere in the foreground. You want to create kind of a dramatic effect. You don't want the project to be backlit like this. You don't want it to be washed out and just have the sun exactly where our camera is. So this is usually kind of a rendering technique that most people like to have. So you get some reflections off of the sun, but you're also getting some shadow in your foreground, which can be nice. All right. And then there's other things you can, other settings that we can affect. The kind of under the camera, we can change the exposure. If it's too dark or too light, we can change that. We can get more realistic if we want lighting and we want to bring in a dome light. Like let's say I have a HDRI image that I want to map to the sky, I can do that as well. I'd have to create a dome light and put that into the scene. But that's another tutorial. This is really just creating a simple rendering using the basic default settings in SketchUp and in Vray. And so the other thing I can use in Vray is an infinite plane. So this is useful when you have a scene and you want to create some shadow. So normally I don't have a floor modeled here, but I want to create a infinite plane so that this gives me a ground plane. So I'm going to click on this infinite plane icon and then just click. Okay, so now I have a ground plane, I have a lighting scenario, and I have my model. I can change the material of each of my objects. Right now, this is set to this iron blurry, which I've imported, but there's all these materials that you can choose from. You can choose from different metals, you can choose from, stone, wood, any of these you can just pick from. And so it's as simple as just clicking on that and then filling it in. Right now, my materials aren't showing up because I'm still in this hidden line style. So if I go back to construction document, or this one says woodworking, urban planning, I guess they have different styles for everything. So this would show me my materials now. So if I were to change this to metal, now I'm getting a preview of that material. Control Z. So that's kind of the setup for materials and lighting, and just a very basic overview. And then once you hit render, it's going to give you a preview of your model. So right now, since it's using my CPU, it's calculating all of the lighting, the shadow, and how that lighting hits the materials, and it's bouncing that light using various rays and calculations that it's doing. So that'll take, I think in this case, probably just a couple minutes. In larger renderings, it can take, hours, but rendering technology has gotten a lot better. So it's, I think, getting faster and faster, and using your graphics card can accelerate that a lot. So a lot more rendering technology is moving in that direction, using the graphics card instead of the CPU. So now that the render is finished, I can inspect it. I'm using my scroll button to just kind of zoom in on it. It's pretty high quality. This is kind of the level that we want. It's giving me some shadow, which is nice. And again, this is more of a realistic kind of lighting scenario. I can save this just to confirm that it was saved properly. Save this under renderings. And there's ways that you can post-process even within V-Ray. I'm not going to go into that, but you can do some corrections and things within V-Ray even before photoshopping it, if you like. All right, and so let's say we wanted to bring in kind of a more realistic lighting scenario. And again, this is kind of going beyond the assignment, but just in case you want to see this. So I can go to V-Ray lights. So what I want to do is bring in what's called an HDRI image. This is basically mapping a 360 photograph onto my scene so that all of the lighting in the scene comes from the photo. So what V-Ray is going to do is it's going to grab the brightest part of that photo, and it's going to make that the sun location, and then all of the other lighting. So let's say it's a sunset. It's going to give me a lighting scenario that's more purplish, and you'll see how it looks very realistic when it's grabbing the lighting quality from an image. So when you see these hyper-realistic renderings, that's usually because they're using an HDRI image for their lighting. So if I go with a dome light, click on that, I've dropped it into the scene, and now if I go to my editor, I can click on this dome light. So that's what I just created. So a dome light, by default, they actually have a sky that's set up here. What I want to do though, I still have this sunlight turned on, so I'm going to set this to 0, so eliminate the effect of that. And so I just have my dome light. And in this, I just need to go to the texture slot. So I want to assign an HDRI image to this scene. So I can click on this. I'm going to browse. I'm going to find the HDRI that I need. So if I scroll down to HDRI, I can find, I've downloaded a series of HDRIs. When I bring that in, and so I bring that in, then I can go back. This is the back button over here. I can also affect the texture placement. So where's the sun located horizontally? I can rotate horizontal. Like if I want my shadows to be in a different location, I can play with it this way. This is how I would do it with an HDRI. But anyway, I'm happy with that. I hit back, and now you're seeing that it's using this HDRI image to calculate the lighting in this view. So again, let's say I don't like the lighting. I can change the orientation of my image and rotate. Oops, that's rotating the other way. Rotate horizontal. This is what I want to do. So I can change that, and then if I go back, I can set the way it's calculating the lighting. I can change the intensity of that HDRI here if I want to make it brighter or more intense. There's a lot more we can kind of play with here, but this is the basics of it. So I have the image. I can close this when I'm ready to go, and I'm going to set this to be more of an eye level view, and I'm going to change this from parallel to perspective. Now I'm going to be down here, and if I hit render, so it's pretty dark, so we're going to have to play with that, but what it's doing is it's grabbing the lighting from the image to, you can't even see it on the screen. It's grabbing the lighting from this image to calculate the lighting in the scene. So there's a render setting here that this is a interactive render. So if I click on this, it's going to do basically a real-time render that'll give me the ability to kind of check progress as I work. So rather than just setting everything up and then hitting one render button, this is going to update as I work in real time. So as I change the settings here, I can change intensity. I can go into settings and change the exposure value. So if I want higher exposure, it's too high, I can play with the exposure and see how that affects the rendering in real time. Once you kind of have settings that you like, too dark, probably the brightness we want, then you can then go in, and what I normally do is I'll just hit the stop real-time render, and then I'll just hit render. So this is now going to use my CPU to do kind of a final full rendering of it. And again, it's using the lighting scenario from the image to calculate it. So you can use a sunset, and it'll use lighting from the sunset image. So this is still rendering, but you can see the kind of lighting quality of using an HDRI image. So I hope that's been